Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Adi Achint, part 2 of the security threats to India, the challenges what we have with us, and how does the global scenario affect Indian national security. In the last episode, we actually took you through what is India's security challenges all about, how are they divided, what is the country all about, and what are the divisions within the country that actually affect or in some times actually bring about the security challenges within the country. To take this matter forward, I have with me Major General Sudhakarji, VSM, who has vast experience in operations across a wide spectrum of conflict and terrain profiles within India and abroad. He was holding the appointment of the Deputy Commandant of the Army War College. He is doing today a doctoral thesis on the amicable resolution of the India-China border disputes, an analyst and a commentator on strategic issues. Sir, thank you so much for joining me for this part 2, where we discuss what is the global strategic picture or what is the global strategic environment around us and how does India plan to negotiate itself through this valley or through this entire mess which is around us today.
Firstly, good afternoon, Nadi. Thank you so much for um, carrying on with the episode. This is episode number 2. And Adi, I must also compliment you for the questions which you have framed very in a comprehensive manner about the global strategic environment. Ladies and gentlemen, there are few issues on which I had alluded to during my our last episode. So, before we go ahead, I would like to put the record straight. I have agreed with Mr. Adi when he said that India has overtaken population over China, and I have got it corroborated from multiple sources. But let's wait for formal documents to actually notify it. Okay, I take that point. That is one. And second, ladies and gentlemen, I have been talking to many forums by and by. One point which came loud and clearly in the last week was the largest Indian diaspora, which is a very important factor when we go ahead and start talking about the global strategic environment. As on today, it is approximately 32 million, which is the largest in the world. 32 million. And in terms of the remittances, you can well estimate less the COVID-19 period, India is to have something close to $80 billion per annum. And the major share of this was around 52% of this used to come from the Middle East. So that is the second point. Third point I wish to also clarify here is that by 2050, India is expected to have uh, around 1 billion population who will be in the middle class. So these are the three issues, and it will have very interconnected issues while we discuss the global strategic environment. Ladies and gentlemen, before we go into the global strategic environment, I wish to very broadly touch upon the issue which we are going to cover in today's episode. Firstly, the global strategic environment. Thereafter, I wish to cover some issues about the relevance and the rising importance of Asia in this century, 21st century. And third, and the last point in this episode is going to be what Adi has framed the question on terrorism, the epicenter, the global epicenter of the terrorism, how it is impacting the entire global order. Now, before we get going ahead with the specifics, very broadly, the global strategic environment is characterized by, to start with, the pathogen, the COVID-19 pandemic. Nobody in the world expected prior to December 2019 or prior to January 2020 until it came to the limelight that a pathogen like this could impact the global order so severely, so seriously, that the very purpose of the global or the world organizations, the mandate which they are empowered with, they will not be able to exercise. These global organizations, ladies and gentlemen, the very purpose of their existence is under big question as of today. Plus, I also would like to bring about one point. The center stage of all activities for quite some time kept on revolving around the developments in and around Afghanistan. It has got very relevant issues to be shared in a forum like this, and particularly for a superpower as big, as strong as United States. There were some revelation factors which came out in the open. After a long duel of domestic challenges, which US by and by was going through, perhaps most of us may not be aware that these 20 years, 2 decades of warfare between Iraq and Afghanistan, US has had a large number of veterans who have operated in these areas of operation. They're almost close to 9 lakhs. Majority of the veterans, they belong to California. Out of these close to 9 lakhs of veterans, large number of them are suffering from the post-traumatic disorders.
PTSD.
There are good number, almost about 1 lakh veterans have attempted committing suicide. These are the statistics from the congressional paper. Out of 1 lakh every year, 1,000 have committed suicide. And 18% of this population, they do not get any employment. 25% who get employment, their income is less than the threshold or the level of poverty. That is, they get less than $21,946 per annum, which is very, very meager amount to look after a family of 4. So such like issues, they became at some point in time a very compelling factor for the leadership, both during Donald Trump as also thereafter during Biden's time. Incidentally, uh, Kamala Harris is also, she is a leader from California. All the veterans have been putting pressure that it's about time that the US reconsiders its global strategy. Rather than spending money and spending the lives of the soldiers for making or remaking a destiny of nations over the world, it's about time to look inwards for the development of the country. That is where I'm coming to the point, is that asserting the sovereignty of the nations has assumed an unusual priority and precedence than the commitment to the international cooperation. This is where, ladies and gentlemen, has led to the third and most important point, is the polarization amongst the major powers, the US, the China, and the Russia. While Russia is trying to regain its influence towards the Eastern Europe and Asia, China, as we all know, after having the economic boom for nearly 30 or more than 30 years, having developed the economy to today's status of $14.7 trillion, is going around with the BRI project and its expansionist policy and the debt trap policy. Today, as on today, by the last count, I have a figure of 120 countries which have come under the BRI scheme. Out of these 120 countries, there are almost about 48 to 50 countries who have raised their hands. They cannot sustain the BRI projects. So on one hand, we have the global organizations raising their hands to unable to assert their authority and mandate. The other hand, rising superpowers, the rising power of China, is not prepared to shoulder the responsibility of international commitment. And alongside, we have United States, the sole superpower, has got domestic compulsion to pull back, and they have reviewed the strategy in the global order. With this backdrop, ladies and gentlemen, I also must share with this forum, that the European Union, while it may have had a very, very rising and good bouncing economy, somehow in past 5 to 10 years and even now, even in foreseeable future, the European Union has started losing its shine, its relevance, and its declining influence is writ large in all its activities. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to go over certain points because of the failing mandate of the organization and also the international commitment. The worst affected scheme or the concept which bound many nations to fight against is the framework, the moral framework of fighting against the terrorism. This has somehow has been a failing example of global concept which started with, and one was very, very optimistic and hopeful that we would carry it forward. But look back, the way US has withdrawn itself from Afghanistan, handed over the responsibility to nobody other than Taliban, which is one of the I would say listed organizations as per the UN. So these are the background which I thought I'll share with you. Plus, we have Shia and Sunni tussle going on in the Middle East. We have host of other issues between the Iran in specific, US and Iran relationship, US and China, US and Russia. All these put together, we also have things like Brexit. The UK has been able to pull out of the European Union. There are very challenging circumstances which are evolving now. Hong Kong, on one hand, by force or by coercion, China has managed to now integrate it with the nation state of China under the One China policy. And same goes if you go a little more further to the east and southeast or South China Sea, we have China reclaiming the islands and gone on to the first line of island and started demanding or claiming integration of Taiwan in near future. With that, back to you, Adi.
It's a confused global order. That's the only thing that I would say. And what has happened is even the laziest of the diplomats in the world have had to literally tighten up their belts and actually go around the world trying to get their country's perspective heard, or get their own game on to kind of get their country into an advantageous position. And India is not behind. I mean, we've been trying to kind of stabilize and streamline our own position. And I just like everybody to think about the time from the second wave. And I'm sure you'll agree with me. During those days, India's might in terms of diplomacy was pretty much on the down low. We were more in terms of looking inward. That's the time that the entire Afghanistan thing happened and we were kept off the big table. A whole lot of things took place during that 3, 4, 5 months, which kept us out. But then we now look at it a factor that a lot of the things which are happening around us within the region and in the global order, and we can see within the certain amount of conferences that have happened, India is coming in the center. So, sir, you've told us what is the strategic picture. I'd like us to dwell a little more with regards to the virus, because that to me is going to be a point in a map. And I've said this before in one of my videos, so that it's going to be a point in a graph where things have started wobbling after that, in terms of national security, in terms of economy, in terms of pretty much everything. So why don't you just take us, through a journey of the changes in the global security and the global strategic perspective because of the virus?
Excellent. Adi, the question couldn't have been more relevant. It's a fantastic question you have thrown. But before that, a lot of questions are coming to me from different forums that under the present and the prevailing circumstances, will US continue to be the only superpower? my understanding, without a second thought, it will. Mere economic might doesn't make a country a superpower. There are so many other issues. Today, how many countries in the world are in favor of China in any manner? So, be that as it may, COVID-19 is nothing but it is a biological warfare. That is why in the comprehensive national security, take your mind back to the first episode when I was covering different paradigms of security. In comprehensive national security, I have added a round which was non-existent in the paradigm of the security. That paradigm is biological security. Ladies and gentlemen, this particular pathogen, regardless whether China accepts or not, the entire global order and the perspective has suffered. There are so many deaths for lack of specific and accurate data. I'll refrain from this thing. It has gone beyond all counts.
There 5 million people across the world. Sorry to interrupt you. There was
5 million.
5 million people.
5 million people have died. There are so many people still in the hospital. The third wave is manifesting in Delta variant. And still the vaccines are not, there is a vaccine diplomacy and a contest in the global order. We have not come together to a common platform. There are so many other issues. Essentially, whether it was by design or default, I'll hold back my comment. Regardless of it, there is a level of maturity and level of responsibility or emerging power like China was expected to display. Somehow, this has not manifested in the global order at all from the day this particular thing came. When you are doing things with positive intent, one is bound to go wrong. In my opinion, China should have come forward and admitted, yes, it is there or it is not there. The house is entirely open. Check if it is there, let's find a solution. Let's join our heads. The problem is right from day one, China has been hiding things. It has not been transparent and accountable as far as the COVID-19 thing is concerned. Second, most important point is being a rich nation, they also have responsibility to look at the neighbors, reach out, give out the support system. Somehow it was malicious. It was, I would say, it was very despicable the way they went about in handling the COVID-19. I think even if there was a chance of China becoming a superpower, in my view, they have lost that chance and opportunity. More than anything else is the trust factor. Trust, no matter what the US has done in Afghanistan, still this nation state has rose to the occasion and has proven its credentials in favor of rules-based international order. It may not have been 100%, but definitely it has been more than 50%. This is my take on the whole issue. Third issue I wish to bring about is military might or no might. Essentially, the livelihood of people is revolving around the fundamental factor of the economy. The economy of the world has taken such a beating because of this persistent pandemic. It is not for 6 months or 9 months, or it is almost close to 2 years now. Because of this dismal economic picture, the economic having gone down significantly, the production having stopped, the trading having stopped, and I would say the large number of people having got unemployed. I had the statistics, but I have not been able to update in such a short time. Large number of people have lost their livelihood. I was in Oman about a few months back. I found almost close to 1 lakh people in one day. They were thrown out of different multinational companies. They were on the streets. They had no money, no food to eat. They didn't have also tickets to fall back to a country, different countries. India is a major share of manpower, HR resources in the Middle East. So such are the kinds of things. And that also doesn't bring us to the end state. End state, what I mean is that the stable state, after so much of turbulence has been gone through. I want to highlight one aspect here. Maybe the non-military audience will have to make little effort to understand what I am saying, but definitely those military audience who are going to be listening to me, you see, the environment has become absolutely complex, even prior to COVID-19. COVID-19 pandemic has compounded this particular complexity. Further, the trade barrier between nations is made it even more acute. Then we had recently in the Glasgow, the meeting on climate, COP26, before that G20. Non-presence or absenteeism of emerging powers like China, or would we say superpower, claiming to be a superpower, in such kind of global meetings, it reflects a lot of negativity. It is taking the world order in a negative manner. But I wish to highlight certain issues, if you permit me, Adi, unless you have something to chip in. Four highlights, or few highlights I wish to make. One is major countries around the world are readjusting the security and military strategies and organizing new structures. This is my reading, my analysis. The second point I wish to highlight here is that the US and Chinese militaries are engaged in technological and institutional innovations. Third point I want to also share with the audience is that Russia has undertaken wide military reforms. It is not catching the attention of the international or the audience. And this, what kind of military reforms it has undertaken, we'll cover it as and when we come to that episode. UK, France, Germany, and Japan and India are rebalancing and optimizing the structure of their militaries. Ladies and gentlemen, the last point I'm sharing, just to define why and what all issues are making the situation and environment complex is this. There is a great emphasis on information and intelligentization of weapon systems, platforms which would provide military superiority to the side having it in large measure. These are the few highlights which I thought are conceptual framework, and they have changed the characteristics of the conflict. The whole conflict, ultimately, it has to manifest in some military form. What are these changes? These changes, not all of them, only the important ones I would like to share. The interstate confrontation in the non military domain, ladies and gentlemen, such as political, economic, and information has intensified. The second most important point which I wish to share is that there is a growing trend of the disappearance of the line between the states at peace and the transition to a state of war. And the number of participants in military conflicts are broadening and increasing day by day. Apart from regular forces, internal protest potential of the population, along with terrorist and extremist organizations, are on the rise. Ladies and gentlemen, there are many other issues, but one of the important issues which I like to flag here is that military operations are increasingly becoming dispersed and conducted simultaneously across the entire spectrum of conflict. And therefore, there is a requirement of mobile forces, which has become very, very acute in today's time. That is because the role of information warfare and its psychological effects is expanding, and there is an increase in the ratio of precision weapons. It is more widespread, which requires a new system of defense and manufacturing ecosystem. And the principal feature of future conflicts will be extensive use of smart and precision technology, including robotics and lethal autonomous weapon systems. Ladies and gentlemen, the ability to effectively command and control troops is acquiring special importance, which necessitates secure and encrypted communications. This is on the sideline in response to the question which you asked me about the COVID-19. The third wave is almost round the corner. In some part of the world, it's already spreading, like UK, US, some portions of UK. We have China itself, I'm told, out of all the provinces, 15, 16 provinces are deeply, very, very badly affected. So as Russia, and so as some countries of the Southeast Asia are affected. So therefore, unless there is a point of convergence in the global order and joining our heads together to find a global solution to such kind of pandemics in future, maybe we are actually going from bad to worse. Back to you, Adi, for next question, please.
The verse is about the selfishness being displayed by a lot of the rich countries by hoarding vaccines and so on and so forth. I was reading a very sad news which talked about Africa not having syringes to inject their people. This is something which is beyond me with regards to medical companies who are giving vaccinations to country but not syringes to put them in.
Yeah, I agree with you, Adi. That's very unfortunate. Very, very unfortunate. That somehow the WHO has not played up.
Failed.
We have not been as this very, very, very deplorable situation in Africa. Absolutely. That I agree with you. I totally agree with you.
So I'd like to move us to West Asia. There's a lot which is happening in West Asia with the JCPOA along with the Abraham Accords, the Abraham Accords was something unexpected by a lot many in the world, along with news coming out of Israel and Saudi having talks at the back end. And this sort of a situation was neither confirmed or denied by anybody, but today it's there in the public domain. There's a lot of changes happening in that region. How do you see this entire situation?
I was there, Adi, a few months back in the Middle East, and having gone around and felt the pulse of the people. The fundamental paradigm of all the changes is the Shia-Sunni tussle. That is my reading. I may be wrong, but I don't think I am. And because of Shia-Sunni tussle, a lot of damages have happened in the world. Lot of damages. While the US-Iran has enjoyed till sometime, till 1979, had a different kind of a relationship, but thereafter there was a change in the global order because of this particular relationship. US and Soviet, they had a problem. But the Islam in the Middle East is all about the Shia and Sunni. Israel, we know the existence, the growth of Israel, and the tussle between Israel and Palestine. My take on the whole issue is that Middle East is essentially burning, is going through a turbulent phase for many factors. That one of the factors which I feel is the oil. At one point in time, it was the major energy source of energy producing in the world. Till such time, the superpower, let's say the US, was able to meet its requirement of energy from the Middle East. I would say between 1970 to 1980 or 90, the percentage of import of the crude or the energy variants from the Middle East used to touch a percentage of 85%. And this requirement or dependence of Middle East on Middle East has drastically reduced. And as in 2020 December, the percentage of dependence has come to zero. They have started exporting oil. I would say this is the turning point. Economics and being the primary source of energy having changed, and thereafter the COVID-19 has come, which has made the requirement of oil as redundant to the economics of the global order. So what I'm coming to is that primarily it is the superpower, its dependence on the Middle East for oil, and thereafter zero dependence for oil on the Middle East. Okay, and and instead of oil flowing from, let's say, east to west, it started flowing from west to east. That is the change which has taken place. This is one part. The second part is, unfortunately or fortunately, terrorism as a concept or as an objective component of the civil society has been created by nobody other than us. Even the superpower itself is responsible. The whole gamut of the confrontation started during the Cold War. The Cold War started after the Second World War was over. It carried on till 1991. And these mujahideens who were created essentially to beat Russians in the Afghanistan. I would say that terrorism would have been prevalent even prior to that, but it came to limelight in a very coherent and substantive form while defeating or pushing out the Russians from the Afghanistan. It was the creation of the Pakistan with the help of Americans. And after the Russians left, then by and by we created Al Qaeda, we created Taliban, we created a host of other agencies. So the genesis, if you ask me, of the terrorism started from then. But the whole attention was here. The focus was the oil. Till then, US was deployed to actually ensure that USSR disintegrated with the help of China. If you take your mind back to 1979, Kissinger, he came on a visit with the help of Pakistan, went to China, had a clandestine deal with them, and they managed to, in support of China, they managed to disintegrate Russia very, very effectively. And after the 91, then started this whole drama of Middle East. The Americans, they came in a big way to check the expansion of Iraq towards Kuwait. And thereafter, the 9/11 has taken place. Thereafter, the Afghanistan, and finally, they have pulled back. So, to put the whole narrative in, to summarize the thing, I would say the same people who were created by the superpower or Pakistan or similarly, like, placed countries in the world are the ones who are finding it difficult to contain the growth of this very organization of the terrorist outfit. So, therefore, there is a requirement to actually introspect as far as the global order is concerned. Maybe the time has come wherein some steps have to be taken to create zones of peace in the corridor of Afghan Pakistan. This is my personal take. Whether it will pave a peaceful roadmap ahead or not is a matter to be seen in times ahead. But I would say, for the sake of peace and harmony and tranquility in the world, some beginning has to be made to take a right step based on rules-based international order. Terrorism cannot be accepted in any form, anywhere on the face of the earth. That's my take, unless you have something to add, please.
Sir, I think one of the biggest challenges, and we call China a challenge, but I think one of the biggest challenges everybody, including China, faces is terrorism. Um, the stories about a lot of violence within Xinjiang are not very well known, but somebody who actually studies China will know that they've actually gone through quite a lot of incidents with regards to terrorism in their areas as well. One of the reasons of their heavy-handed approach in Xinjiang. Um, you know, with regards the JCPOA, sir, and you also mentioned with regards the stability in the Middle East today we see because we see it being stable sometimes, we see it being unstable sometimes, and it's all because of the oil. You've actually brought it out very very nicely, and the path that the Iranians actually show is because of the oil that they actually carry, sir. That's an interesting perspective. So I'd like to move over to China, sir. One of the biggest things, which is biggest issues that we have in front of us, even including India, from its trade war with the US to its cover up of the virus to, I mean, the list is endless. I've pretty much dedicated my entire channel on China, so when I'm still yet to cover most of the important things, uh, BRI and so on and so forth. How do you see China, creating sort of a unrequired issue, if I may put it that way, is within the global strategic order?
Adi, it's a fantastic question that you have asked about China, but before that, we need to understand China a little from the historical perspective, what China is all about. Okay, and when we talk about 100 years of humiliation, I would say 100 is still, you are trying to truncate at the time period. There have been 2000 years of humiliation. You read the history of China, this nation somehow has taken beating from anyone and everyone, except for two odd or three odd places where they have had very marginal success in their endeavor before gaining independence or becoming a PRC in 1949. Um, I would say, the fact of the matter remains that today a common man is getting biased and prejudiced by what Xi Jinping is doing or what China is doing currently. But why China is going through what it is going through today also has got a history. There are many social media posts which are making rounds comparing Xi Jinping with Hitler, Adolf Hitler. It's a very realistic irony, I would say. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, look at China, what it did not have prior to December 2019. It had everything going in its favor. I would say that the purchasing power parity, it's a nominal economy, $14.7 trillion, and going to overtake US by 2027-28, 5 years ahead of the stipulated time frame. Talk about the trade, talk about the production of semiconductor, all the electronic industries. This is the country which was surviving on the entire export of its product to Western countries. And same country today, in past 6 months, almost close to 2,000 plus factories or the industries have moved out of China. There are multinational companies who are pulling out of China for various purposes. But what is the basic issue that comes to my mind is the question that you asked me is that perhaps the internal disorder is the overriding factor which is actually manifesting in the external turbulence. This is my reading. I also have watched almost all your YouTube channel clips that you have been sending me. Very well done. Congratulations. And one that I actually saw was General Shaukin Chauhan's interview. Fantastic. I mean, I know the general very closely. He's got an independent mind, a mind of his own. When he said there is no harm in buying what China can provide us, why should we close our economy? That's an open mind that he was sharing. Well, I have my personal issues. I would like to know, not align my thought process and recommend a thing like this to the government of India. We must do some dam dand ved to actually bring this nation to the knees, bring some degree of discipline, make it an integral part of the global order. You may be anything in the world today, But be responsive, be accountable and responsible as at least as a nation, not as a rich nation. You have your responsibility. You cannot wash off your hand whenever there is a challenge in the global order. Problems will happen. If there is something like COVID-19, which has been tested and also has been engineered by them and has been injected into the environment, and biological warfare has been orchestrated in the world, well, if the intention was positive, noble, they would have definitely come out. Since it was not noble enough, therefore they have not come out with the truth. Taking me back to the future, the present state of China is well known. Its economy is failing. Its relationship in the world order has collapsed totally. The BRI project is almost a non-starter, I would say. After the initial BRI started in the year, if I'm not wrong, it was 2013, isn't it? Prior to 2013, in 2008, it started with a string of pearls. They wanted to actually start building up infrastructure along the littoral states around India, because India has got the distinct advantage of geography and the historical linkages in and around Indian Ocean. So China realized that if it has to become a superpower, then it has to be able to dominate the Indian Ocean effectively. Because through the Indian Ocean, through the sea lanes of communication, almost close to 83% of its energy or the oil, it passes on ships. Plus the entire trade of all its export component is passing through the sea lanes of communication, which actually the Indian Ocean is a major stretch. So therefore, it realized that there is a need to effectively link up or develop a working rapport with all the nation states around India, to name Nepal, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Myanmar. You have Sri Lanka, we have Maldives, as also Pakistan is a vassal state, as we all know. Now it has taken a complete circle and come into the Afghanistan. Whether it comes with boots on ground is a issue which will be decided, which time will tell us. But suffice to say that none of these are going to be successful unless there is a willing participation by the host country. That willing participation, in my opinion, is not there. There is a tendency on the part of the China to have some hidden agendas in every project they initiate in any country. That that host country into a debt trap. A case in point is Pakistan. 3 days back, China has demanded 26 billion Pakistani rupees to pay the interest of the loan they have given to Pakistan so far. Pakistan, as it is, you know, they require something close to 51.6 billion US dollar for debt servicing for next 2 years. So therefore, the sincerity and I would say good relationship between two nations for the better global order, for the healthy relationship in the global order based on rules-based international order is actually not coming about from China. So therefore, there is a suspicion. Therefore, there is actually, each one is looking at the other that we are being taken for a ride. So therefore, China has a very important role to carry out introspection in itself. Regardless of the future intentions, it has to carry out a mid-course correction towards its economy, towards its internal order of law and order situation, towards its education system, which it has gone about unleashing new policies, towards integrating the minorities which are around the complete Han dynasty or the Han population, be it Manchurian, be it Mongolia, be it your Xinjiang province or the Tibet. Back to you, Adi.
Interesting you mentioned the population, sir, because that is, I think, the biggest challenge that China will have in the coming future, because with the way it's picking up enemies, countries are going to start fingering it. And once that happens, the biggest fault line within China, it's non-assimilation of its own population. So that's something that I agree with. So I'd like to spend a little time on terrorism. With Afghanistan coming in, we saw a spurt of activity within Kashmir, although calmed down right now. But we've seen a spurt of activity in Kashmir. We've seen a spurt of activity within Afghanistan, where the ISIS today is termed to be recruiting the old Afghan army soldiers. So that's something which is a very, very, very dangerous thing to happen, because this it follows the same principle what happened in Iraq as well. Leaving that aside, there are lone wolf attacks which are taking place all over the all over the world, for that matter. New Zealand, which is supposed to be a peaceful place, had loads of attacks. So terrorism seems to be reeking its head up, and the global strategic perspective gets, I think, one of the most damaging effect from this particular activity. How do you see it, sir?
Absolutely right. What you are saying is correct. Afghanistan-Pakistan corridor, ladies and gentlemen, has got something close to, the last count was made in 2018, and thereafter there is no revised estimate. But as per my count, it's gone up to almost about 14,000 terrorists are under training in Afghan-Pakistan corridor, the training establishments. These 14,000 terrorists are from different factions. They are coming from South Asia, they're coming from Iraq, Syria, they're coming for the training purposes from different parts of the country, from Maldives, from Bangladesh. You'll be surprised to know that almost about 8 to 9,000 youths of Bangladesh have gone and joined them. It happened, I think, in last about 6 to 9 months' time. And although the linkages with Bangladesh, because the one point also stands out very clearly, I would like to cover it here itself. There are two flanks, two epicenters of radicalization and terrorism which are emerging. Unless appropriate actions are taken and rooted out completely, India is actually going to be in and out of between. There is going to be alternate sine and cos theta between peace and turbulence. One is Afghanistan-Pakistan corridor, the other one is Bangladesh. The linkage between Bangladesh and the Afghanistan dates back to 1979, when the Mujahideens were brought in to fight against the Soviets. And besides that, it's also very interesting to share with you, Adi. The other day I was reading a book on the deep state of Pakistan. It brings out one issue that there is a congressional report which says that 67 terrorist organizations, international organizations, are active today in the world. There are many more, but 67 are registered by virtue of the violent activities, the wherewithal they have, and the finances they enjoy. Okay. And the number of the jihadis they have. Out of 67, there are 12 terrorist foreign organizations which are operating in Pakistan. Out of these 12, 5 are actually oriented and looking at India, including Lashkar-e-Toiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed. All these, Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, they are the tool of Pakistan Army. They are directly under the ISI. Second point I want to highlight is that the Haqqani network, Haqqan, who are Haqqanis? Haqqanis are basically the Pashtuns. These are the Haqqanis who have undergone Islamic training in the madrasas or the seminaries, Haqqani seminaries, on this side of Pakistan, of the Duran line. So all these Haqqanis, they are something like they are the right hand tool of the Pakistan Army or the ISI. They are the ones who execute very brutal and ruthless violent activities against the given target by the ISI. They are the ones who collect the drug money from the drug plantation farmers, from the processing centers, from the carrier who carries it, the smugglers, and the different sources. UN headquarters had the agency which deals with this, UNODC or something like that. They had actually brought out a figure of $30 billion as revenue out of drug in 1 year, that is 2020, which I also couldn't believe. But they have taken multiple aspects into consideration. They have actually added the compounding cumulative earnings at different sources, different levels, and different places. It has actually come to more than $30 billion per year. That is 2020. So if that is the kind of earning which Haqqani is facilitating in recovering the money from multiple agencies, and more so, it has further been streamlined with the fencing having come up. Between Pakistan and Afghanistan, there are only select transit points. These are 16 of them. Earlier, they used to have 235 such kind of crossing points. So at least now at these points, the monitoring system and the transit facilities and the accounting of the people who are coming in and going out has actually enhanced. So another agency is the ISIS Khorasan, which you have brought out in quite a few of your YouTube channel. I think this is the best coverage that I have come across about ISIS Khorasan. Interestingly, in one of my readings, I came to realize that ISI has managed to penetrate its own cadre into ISIS Khorasan 5 to 6 years back. ISIS Khorasan, which was a motley organization after 2017 blast and aerial attack by the US forces, they lost out quite a few of their leadership during those conflicts. Thereafter, they have managed to regroup by getting people from Iraq, from Syria, from new recruits who are undergoing training there itself at the Afghan corridor. Today, as on today, they have 2,500 or 3,000 cadres in their particular organization. They have already inducted people and they've created sleeper modules in the Indian subcontinent. The modules have been busted in UP, West Bengal, and Kerala. So therefore, all these aspects, if you keep, and most important thing is that there is an intrinsic correlation or linkages of dependency. Taliban, when we talk about Taliban, Haqqanis and Taliban, I was unable to distinguish until as late as say, a month back, until you held that interview between General Dushwant and myself. Taliban, Tehrik Taliban, which is after the government of Pakistan and the armed forces of Pakistan. Then you have the Uyghur Muslims from Xinjiang province. The Uyghur Muslims from Xinjiang province, they have also been found with the ISIS Khorasan. In the recent blast which took place in Kunduz, I'm sure you would have read a lot of issues. The one of the suicide bombers happened to be a Uyghur Muslim. Same goes with the case with the Balochi Liberation Front. The blast which took place in Kandahar in the month of October, I don't remember the exact date, the suicide bomber happened to be from the group of the Balochi Liberation Front. So such are the kind of complements. It's becoming complex day by day. To me, it appears that unless Pakistan reins in sincerely, the deep state in Pakistan also, starts treading the path of righteousness. To me, it appears that the end of Pakistan has has begun to manifest. Sooner or later, this nation state may actually disappear. It may appear to be a kind of an exaggeration as of now, because unless they put things in the right perspective, the economy has gone down. It's the rate of inflation has come to 12.66, 13%. The forex reserve is down to $17.6 billion, not enough to meet the requirement for the debt servicing for the regular import. They have borrowed money from Saudi Arabia at the rate of 3.2%, which is very, very high. They're also borrowing money from IMF has declined, the World Bank has declined to give them any kind of loan, so has the Asia Development Bank. If China comes to the rescue, I doubt if China is going to come to the rescue. If at all it comes to the rescue, then it will be at the cost of something else, like the Karachi port. So it's another Hamban Tota. Gwadar has turned out to be another Hamban Tota, which is going to be taken and put the entire nation state into a kind of a debt trap. So this particular paradigm is becoming a epicenter. Sooner or later, the ISIS Khorasan has also started threatening that they are planning to attack US in next 1 year's time. So therefore, what it comes to? It comes to the fact that instead of abandoning the ongoing operations against terror, I think we need to bring in synergy and bring multinational kind of a front and framework to make all these nations commit, be it China, be it Russia. I know it sounds very very upstart and very difficult to achieve, but then these are the only way forward. You have no other answer to counter the terrorism. That's it. Back to you, Adi.
So yes, that I believe it's a. I mean, because it has to be a concerted effort. Otherwise, one country is harboring it against the other country, and it's all lip service at the end of it. So we don't really see tangible results coming out at the end of the day. So the Indo-Pacific, it was known as the Asia-Pacific before, but I guess they've realized that India cannot be separated out of the Indo-Pacific. So now they've started calling it Indo-Pacific. Uh, Having said that, has a lot in terms of a battle going on, in terms of a military battle or a confrontation which is going on within China. There are tussles between certain countries as well, with groups of countries which have been formed to handle the Chinese problem within the Indo-Pacific. Take it with regards to the Quad, the AUKUS, so on and so forth. There's a West Asia Quad that has been brought up again with the focus onto securing the sea lines of communication against the Chinese interference in that area. So there is a lot which is happening, and this seems to be the center of the world. How do you see it, sir?
Well, I totally agree with you. There are two major components which are coming up in world order today, which are challenging peace and tranquility. One is the terrorism in the Middle East, Afghan-Pakistan corridor, which is the global epicenter, and which has had an outreach to Bangladesh at the center of radicalization. Also, an outreach to the Northwest Africa. Your Mali, your Algeria, all these kinds of countries. So, slowly, the ISIS is managing to have its arm getting extended. The arc of sphere of influence is going far and wide. Also, at the same time, there is another issue which is taking place, the rising China. The peaceful rise China has been replaced by most violent rise of China, as I look at it in my parlance, with the limited expression that I have. What I would like to highlight in this is that China is precisely doing what the Germans did long years back. And to be particular, I would say Adolf Hitler, what he did. They had somebody has very beautifully correlated how expansionism also was tried out successfully, but thereafter it actually fell flat on the face of the aggressor. So I would say this particular rising China somehow has been missed by the sole superpower, US, at some point in time. Instead of having vacated, although they have substantive resources in South Korea, they have substantive military resources in Japan, they have been further reinforced in past 6 to 9 months' time. In fact, in my calculation, it came out that it is almost close to more than 60% of the resources, naval resources, which are in and around Southeast Asia and Far East. And to be more accurate, it is 64 to 66%. But there was a period after Soviet Union disintegrated or collapsed, that factor of glasnost. I heard you talking about it a few days back in one of your interviews, perestroika and glasnost. So United States shifted its focus. We call this as the pivot in Asia. The pivot in Asia shifted its focus after the collapse of Soviet Union from the West Pacific or the Southeast Asian countries to the Middle East for whatever purpose. Maybe the oil was very much in demand that time. The percentage of dependency was close to 85% of not only US, the other countries in the Western world as well. So therefore, that was one. Second, there was unstable government in the Middle East or the Arabic countries, I would say. And the monarchies and the authoritarian governments which were in place at that point in time, they were not playing to the gallery of the global order. Maybe the superpower felt at that point in time that their presence was paramount. So, to bring about some order into these kind of places, to me it appears that the entire fulcrum of the world is revolving around Indo-Pacific in this. Today, the biggest challenge is China. China has got everything. It has got almost close to 7% of the total treasury of the US. That comes to close to almost $2 trillion. So having some amount in the treasury of US, it means a lot. There are bonds which have been issued. Also, the value of dollar can be brought down or enhanced by virtue of mere presence in the treasury itself. Now you talk about the trade warfare which is going on between the US and China. China China is the biggest trading partner of US as of today. $644 billion per annum is a huge amount. No other nation has got this kind of export coming to US. If that is the kind of the export to US, similarly, US also has got its items and stores coming to China. So there is there is a degree of integration in the trade activities going on. But what actually is happening that the world order is turning out to be very, very vitiated and friction ridden, primarily because of Taiwan. As I look at it, that in its white paper, which came out in 2019 after a gap of, I think, couple of years, it was due sometime in 2015, I suppose, came out in 19. Now, on 1st of July, when Xi Jinping gave, after that, the centenary address, again he has brought out that come what may, they will take Taiwan, they will integrate Taiwan with China as per the one country policy, one China policy. Having seen this, I look at the whole dynamics. I also be mindful of the fact that almost close to $5 trillion worth of products get transported along that corridor of South China Sea every year. Almost 1/3 of the oil is getting transported. Almost about 2/3 of other energy resources are getting transported of the global requirement. So, keeping all this in mind, because of lack of the freedom of navigation, because of lack of rules-based international order, and I would say the freedom to operate and navigate in that particular corridor is become a big challenge. Therefore, the global order rightfully has shifted, and that has become the center of our activities as of today. I would say that, and to address this, as you have already brought out, the AUKUS has come about, the Quad has come about, and to me, Quad of 4 nations is not adequate. Maybe each nation is, maybe it will be in order to start, linking up with other nations and take their support to actually maneuver and bring pressure against China in an effective manner. I would say that much, and back to you.
True, sir. As a matter of fact, there are talks about New Zealand having offered to join the Quad. There were talks about Bangladesh. Bangladesh seems to be pushing back against China. There was, just before we started this interview, and I'd like to actually read this out for the audience. There was a notification that came to me with regards a little bit of a tussle between the Sri Lankans and the Chinese with regards to the defense equipment that has been provided to them. So Sri Lankans actually have to say that there are certain equipment which has been sent to Sri Lanka. For example, the FM-90 SAMs are not usable because of battery failures, faulty control system on board Chinese warships, and very low airworthiness of their K-8W trainers, which are the air trainers. So, we see a certain amount of shift amongst other countries within this Indo-Pacific region where China had a pretty strong stand with. That is probably because of very aggressive diplomatic actions around the place. But I agree with you, sir. The Quad and AUKUS is not enough. It has to be brought in with other countries, stronger powers, probably Russia at some point of time, because that will be the kill of China. If somebody is actually able to move Russia towards this side, that will be the day that the Chinese will actually come down onto their knees, because there isn't anything else left for them to this thing. And we all know, anybody who studies China would also know that the Chinese and Russians don't trust each other. So it's a very thin line that relationship forms. Completely agree with you on this particular front, sir. I think this has been a very, very well-rounded discussion on the global strategic perspective. So actually, I think in most of the questions, one thing has been common is the virus. I think you would agree with me on that.
I agree with you, Adi. I agree. But before you make concluding remarks, Adi, I just want to share with the viewers, unless you have a question on
No, please, sir.
Because people need to understand the relevance of Asia. Asia is the largest continent in the world. And it's my mistake. The other day, I was giving a talk to 1,600 prospective students for IS, IPS, CDS, IIT students. So by mistake, I made a incorrect reference of Asia having 60% of the landmass. No, it doesn't have 60%, ladies and gentlemen. It has got 30% of the total landmass of the world. One. With GDP put together, Asia, incidentally, the 25 top countries of GDP or the economic booming, less for the COVID-19 period, they are from Asia. Incidentally, just for information of the viewers, Asia has got 48 countries. 48 countries, and they earlier used to have 4 territories, but Hong Kong, Macau, they have now been integrated with China, and Taiwan also figures in that. There is another country which I'm forgetting, Azerbaijan or some place. Anyway, we'll leave that. The issue here is that Russia is a country, 75% of its landmass lies in Asia, and remaining 25% is the area which is in the proximity of the Eastern Europe. It's close, it's biased towards Europe. And in that 25% of land, you have 75% of the population of Russia living. That is where the status of Russia, it is not being included. I had made a wrong statement 2-3 days back that it has been included. I read it in some paper, the UN headquarters, some document that Russia has been included as part of Asia. No, I stand corrected. In case, even if I'm saying this turns out to be wrong, then I'm open to corrections, ladies and gentlemen. So, this particular patch or this land of Asia, which is close to 30% of the land mass, it has got 48 countries. It has got all growing, the rising economic power with a very high GDPs. It has got largest number of militaries with highest amount of military expenditure. This continent has got largest number of nation states with nuclear power. This has got since the economies are booming in the world, the oil which was earlier going from east to west towards America has started flowing from west towards east. Okay, that is the dynamic. The energy, I'm saying, the energy consumption in the world today is highest in this particular continent, and host of other issues. There is also an issue that along with the wealth, we also enjoy the wealth of being the global epicenter of terrorism, which is the biggest threat in my opinion. And Adi, in one of your questions, you made a very relevant point. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the major threat to the existence of the world, major threat to the peace, harmony, and tranquility of the world, major threat to the economy of the world. COVID-19, I do agree that COVID-19 is a biological pathogen which is affecting the pandemic. We have been able to conquer the pandemic. There are no quick answers. It may actually come back in a different form. China is experiencing this different form. They have not disclosed till now. In past 7 to 10 days, you are a China watcher yourself. You will bear me out. There is some new form of this COVID-19 which they are not disclosing. It is not Delta variant. It is some new form which has affected 15 provinces in China. There are a large number of people who are getting affected because of this. So now just leave that aside. What I am coming to is that here is a continent which is called as the 21st century is of Asia. The center of gravity of the world today is here in Asia. So therefore, whatever we do, if we show principles of leadership qualities, if we practice rules-based international order here in this continent, the entire global order is also going to gravitate, and we can assume the status of big leaders in the global order. But one amongst us is the black sheep, that is China. China has to make amends and bring in some kind of inherent auditing of its own activities. It has to introspect and carry out analysis. Where is it heading to? Merely switching the paradigm of approach to becoming a lifelong president of one country on the lines of Mao Zedong doesn't take Xi Jinping too far. It actually is bringing down Xi Jinping. It's one-child policy to overcome the problems of one-child policy. They started two. Two gave them problems, did not give them immediate solution. They have started three. People are shit scared. And there is so much of anger inside China itself that it may burst. There may be an implosion inside China. So rather than helping China to grow big and become an effective and well acknowledged superpower, to me, I am fearing that it may be working in a regressive and a retrograde manner and taking us back to where China perhaps won't be wanting or liking to head towards. This is the point I wanted to make to you. And now, floor is yours.
Also, I agree with you. And the Chernobyl moment of China is the, the China virus, Wuhan virus. A lot of people call it the CCP virus, whatever suits one's purpose. But I think that's going to be the Chernobyl moment for this, you know, country. And I think I'm going to take something that you said, and it makes a lot of sense to me that the Chinese wouldn't have had any stumbling blocks in them becoming a superpower had they behaved properly. Even in spite of the virus, if they would have come out, and if you remember the early days of the virus, people said, "Haan, theek hai, kuch aaya hai yaar, theek hai," and they expected China to come out and say, "Yes, something has happened." If you would have just done that, something has happened, we are working on it, we are really sorry. Just one statement out of someone, the world would have said, "Fair enough." They've also lost people. Theek hai, whatever it is, thoda laat loot maar ke, some one-off sanction here and there, and things would have been back to square one. And the Chinese had a great opportunity, which actually India is cashing into right now, with regards vaccinations, with regards supply of equipment in terms of PPEs and so on and so forth. China used to be the largest supplier in the world. Today, India is inching close and going to take over very shortly. We don't have COVID cases, so what are we producing it for? It's going all over the world today. India has promised to give 6 billion doses of vaccines, to the world, which is a large amount. And as a matter of fact, the Covaxin has got its permission now, in spite of the whole lobby standing behind it not doing so. So it's good for us that the Chinese did what they did, because India is able to shine. And I think the only message that I'd like to give Chairman Z is, keep at it, buddy. Thanks a lot. To sum up what you,
Yeah, that's
what
good.
you,
Yeah.
to sum up what you've brought in is very critical, because the world today is changing faster than we can analyze it. Previously, there used to be something that would happen. It would give a lot of people the time to study it, think about it, write papers, discuss this, that, and the other. But we see formation of groups after groups, and the changes and the whole polarity of the entire relationship being changed. We saw a huge tussle between two of the biggest allies. I mean, Britain and France, who've been standing together for centuries now. We've seen tussles between the best of friends and the worst of enemies. So it's a dangerous place. And as General Sudhakarji brought out, terrorism is going to be one of the biggest challenges that we will have. China left it to its own little, tricks will kind of self-destruct, if I may put it that way. You use the word implode, sir, but I'll use the word self-destruct. But terrorism is not going to do so. The global security perspective needs a deep think with regards dealing with this entire thing. Sir, thank you so much for bringing all this stuff out. And it is, it's a matter of importance for us as Indians to understand where we stand and what the world is thinking, or what the world is going through within themselves, because that's the only way we will be able to take our advantage and gain our position that we've been looking for in the world order. Till next time, sir, for the part number 3 of the study of the global security as well as the effects on India. Jai Hind, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Adi. Well done.